What is up, guys? So a couple days ago I did a video looking at all the episodes of The Flash Season 5 and putting them into a tier list. Today I'm going to do the same thing, but with Arrow Season 7. I'm going to look at each episode, put them into the tier that I think they deserve to be in, and in the end I'll rearrange the tier list to more accurately represent my actual ranking for this season, for all the episodes. I did add a couple things, like I added the episode number and the title of the episode so I can remember those things during the recording, but also I arranged the episodes vertically, so it is episode 1 to 7 on the first row, episode 8 to 14 on the second, etc. But I'm going to go horizontally just to spice it up so it isn't, entirely in order of the episodes. So with that in mind, let's start with episode 1, titled Inmate 4587. This episode, I thought when it came out, was genuinely the best season premiere the Arrowverse has ever done. The prison storyline was insanely gripping and the fight scenes were amazing. The new Green Arrow storyline seemed to be very interesting and the mystery of it all. The twist at the end was insane and kind of exciting at the time, and although there were some stupid Felicity scenes, especially the one where she basically defeated Diaz, or at least held him off enough for Argus to show up, that was stupid, but it was an easy flaw to ignore because of all the great things in the episode. That being said, it became a flaw that was not easy to ignore, along with the other flaws with the season in general. The new Green Arrow storyline turned out to be bad, the Flash Forward storyline turned out to be horrible, and while the prison storyline did stay as good as it originally was and even got better, the rest of the episode, looking back, it's pretty bad. That being said, it's not really this episode's fault that the rest of the season screwed up its storylines, but still, because of all those things and also the Felicity stuff, it was knocked down from the S tier to the A tier. Still though, I think it is definitely a good episode, but maybe not the best premiere the Arrowverse has ever done anymore. Then we have episode 8 titled Unmasked, which was where the season started going downhill, mostly because Oliver left prison, and that is really it. They didn't really have any goals for the season outside of the new Green Arrow and the Flash Forwards, which turned out to be pretty bad. This episode had some pretty good fight scenes, but that is basically it. There is some annoying Felicity drama. The reveal of Emiko was unfortunately spoiled to basically everybody because of the leak of episode 10's title, My Name is Emiko Queen, which isn't the episode's fault necessarily, but it did kind of hinder any surprise that you can get from that reveal. On top of that, the whole storyline with the SCBD, which I thought could lead to some interesting developments, didn't really go anywhere in the season, so that kind of falls flat for the episode. It really was only addressed once. It really feels like it was just there to get rid of the conflict between Oliver and the SCBD, which is a conflict I generally like, and it even came back later in the season. So this episode in general, I don't think it's very good, and I'd put it in the D tier. So then we have episode 15, which is pretty connected to episode 8, ironically, because of the whole SCBD thing. In this episode, the Green Arrow and Team Arrow are kind of getting used to being members of the SCBD, which is actually a storyline I kind of enjoyed in this episode. I liked that conflict between them, and it was more of a friendly conflict this time, and I definitely think that they handled that part of the episode rather well. There were some pretty good fight scenes, I'm pretty sure, and also the villain, Midas, who I don't remember his first name, but he really reminded me of the Arrow Season 1 villains that Oliver would typically go after, so I liked that part of the episode. There were some Felicity moments I didn't like, and the Flash Forwards were just really bad, like all Flash Forwards were this part of the season, and looking back, probably the entirety of the season as well, but this episode I felt like was actually not bad at all. Still though, I struggle to call it good, so I would put it in the C tier. So then we have the finale of the season, episode 22, titled You Have Saved This City. This episode is kind of like here or there for me. I think that the conflict between Oliver and Emiko mostly falls flat. It's not very good, and although there are a lot of great fight scenes, especially Bronze Tiger and the rest of Team Arrow going up against the Ninth Circle, there are some great fight scenes. The actual ending conflict between Oliver and Emiko is not very good at all, especially Emiko's turn to the light, which comes out of nowhere and it's just very poorly written and acted through and through, except for from Stephen Amell. That being said, the whole Monitor and Crisis setup part of the episode is incredible. It's so exciting, and also, although I don't like that Felicity is a part of it, I will say that the montage near the end and all of the series finale feels this episode brings is actually pretty emotional, and in general, this episode, although also the Flash Forwards are pretty bad as they usually are, this episode I still think is pretty good, and I don't know if it really deserves to be in the A tier tier, but I would put it in the B tier. But we'll see if I bring it up a little bit, because I might, but if I do, then I'll probably have to bring this up to the S tier as well. Anyway, moving on to episode 2, titled The Longbow Hunters, which I think is actually the worst out of the 7 first episodes of the season. Still, though, it does contain the prison storyline, so that it has that, which makes it automatically a pretty good episode. That being said, the prison storyline part of the episode, I remember it being pretty limited. It was mostly surrounding Miko Queen and the Longbow Hunters who turned out to be the most insignificant villains to ever be introduced into the entirety of the Arrowverse, at least the most insignificant villains who ever had like titles and were kind of built up a little bit and announced even that their castings and their inclusion in the show. Anyway, enough with that mini rant there. I think this episode is definitely not as good as the rest of the first 7 episodes and the prison storyline episodes in general, but still, it has the prison storyline, so it is definitely not bad, and I don't think it deserves to be any lower than the B tier. So then we have episode 9, titled Elseworlds Part 2, which is quite possibly the second best crossover episode in the entirety of the Arrowverse after Elseworlds Part 1. This episode continues the whole dynamic between Oliver and Barry and their body swap, which I love. It's so much fun, and also the inclusion of Kara into that dynamic is also so much fun as well. They visit Gotham City, which is already an insane thing. They introduce Batwoman, who I actually liked in this episode, despite the fact that the trailer for the show and the show in general looks like it's going to be very bad. Batwoman was kind of entertaining in this episode as well. All the Easter eggs and everything they did in this episode to do with Batman and Gotham City, and also the storyline as a whole, the Flash from the 1990s being incorporated into it, and the Monitor scenes at the end, it's all just so good, making this episode easy S tier material. Going from quite possibly, actually not the best episode of the season, but one of the best episodes of the season to what is, in my opinion, the worst. Episode 16, titled Star City 2040, is a horrible episode. I think that the fact that it follows the flash forwards entirely, obviously, it automatically makes it bad. I hate this storyline so much. I hate the concept of the flash forwards. I think that it could have been done well if they just hadn't made it so depressing and sad and dark, made Oliver seem pretty insignificant in the scope of Star City, and made his daughter so infuriating and so much like her mother, Felicity Smoke. I think the whole concept of the flash forwards is incredibly fan-fiction-y, and because of all those things, Star City 2040 ended up being a pretty terrible episode, especially when you compare it to Star City 2046 especially, and also all the other flashback episodes of the entire show. It is even worse than, I'm pretty sure there was one, the flashback episode of season 4. This episode is really bad, and because of that, and also the flash forwards in general, this episode definitely belongs to be in the F tier. So then we have episode 3, titled Crossing Lines, which is automatically one of the best episodes of the season because it is a part of the prison storyline. This episode, the gripping storytelling, the fight scenes, the acting, it's all so top-notch when you look at the prison storyline, and I just love the progression of the story. Everything outside of the prison storyline, not as good at all, like Felicity and Argus and the Longbow Hunters. Pretty sure there was a Diggle storyline, which was fine. This episode is definitely held up by the prison storyline, which honestly is enough for me, so I would put this episode in the A tier. So then we have episode 10, titled My Name is Miko Queen, which I don't think is very good at all. Like, I do think that the whole Green Arrow storyline of the episode is fine. Like, I do like Oliver investigating the new Green Arrow, and I generally like all of that. I don't think that Oliver's reaction to the fact that he has another half-sister and the fact that she is a vigilante was very convincing at all, mostly because of the writing, and I don't think that the storyline in general was very compelling at all. There were some parts of the episode I liked, but mostly not a great episode at all that I'd put in the D tier. Then we have episode 17, titled Inheritance, which the best thing about this episode is, for a part of it, we got to see the Green Arrow and the Red Arrow team up in their costumes, all costumed up, which really felt great because that is a, not very iconic, but it is definitely a pretty cool hero slash sidekick duo, a pretty new one at that from the Rebirth Green Arrow comics, and that was really the best part of the episode. The rest of the episode, not very good at all. I think that the reveal that Miko Queen is is evil was, well, I definitely think that it was definitely something that I didn't really see coming 100%. I think that the execution of the reveal was god-awful, mostly because of the actress who plays Emiko Queen. She is just terrible, especially when playing an evil character. I thought she was fine before this episode, but this episode onwards, she's just terrible in her line delivery. The actual lines aren't very good, but the actress is just so bad. This episode has some good fight scenes and some good moments, but mostly it's not a very good episode, so I would put this episode in maybe the D tier, maybe I'll put it in the C tier. It's definitely not terrible. I definitely like some things about it, but I don't think it's great either. Moving on to episode 4, titled Level 2. Again, automatically one of the best. It is a prison storyline, but this episode is very different from the rest of the prison storyline, as I don't think there's a single fight scene, at least in the Oliver storyline. Now, this episode is mostly focuses on Oliver, which is a huge plus for any episode of Arrow in general, but I really liked what they did here. It felt like kind of a different version of Capuchon from Arrow Season 5, where he's interrogated and he starts remembering things from his past, and then he has to admit something about himself, and I did really like how they handled that. It's definitely not as good as Capuchon, but I definitely think it is still very, very, very good. The therapist who was kind of destroying him and breaking him down in this episode, very much like Adrian Chase, was a great character and a great kind of antagonist in the episode. There were some great emotional beats, emotional moments, and revelations about Oliver Queen as a character. Now, everything outside of this storyline, not very good, like Felicity and Laurel with Silencer, not a very good storyline, and although the flash forwards peaked in this episode when they revealed that Felicity was quote-unquote dead, later episodes kind of got rid of the excitement of that reveal. Although I definitely was excited at the time, it turns out she wasn't dead, which is just so disappointing. Anyway, this episode is still definitely, I think, A-tier material just because of the Oliver storyline, and also the flash forwards near the end of the episode definitely got me excited the first time I watched them. So then we have episode 11, titled Past Sins, which dealt with the Ghost Initiative, the new Suicide Squad, which I thought was pretty interesting. I really liked the storyline that they had in this episode, although it was mostly filler, and when I say mostly, I mean 100% filler. Looking at the season, the whole Suicide Squad in general, the Ghost Initiative in general, was completely filler, and it meant absolutely nothing, but still, it was definitely a very enjoyable storyline. The storyline with Oliver, the kind of one-off villain, the son of the bodyguard that Robert Queen killed back in the first episode of the Arrowverse, in the first episode of Arrow, that was definitely a pretty enjoyable storyline, and I do think this episode also had a pretty great storyline with Laurel as well. Definitely a pretty good episode through and through, but I don't think it really deserves to be any higher than the B tier. Then there is episode 18, titled Lost Canary, which is the Birds of Prey inspired episode. This episode was kind of fun. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this episode. The Birds of Prey teaming up, or the Birds of Justice, I guess, as they're called later in the episode. I think they all bounce off each other fairly well. At least, you know, Sarah, Dinah, and Laurel. Felicity shouldn't really be included in that. I know she shouldn't be on the team at all, but I think the other three, the three canaries of this show, I think they bounced off each other pretty well, and the redemption arc conclusion of Laurel, while I don't think completely perfect, and honestly I think it happened so long ago, I still did enjoy that whole storyline in this episode, so I put Lost Canary in the B tier. So then we have episode 5, titled The Demon, which you already know it is a prison storyline episode, so it is automatically one of the best episodes of the season, and is, looking at episode 2, at least B tier, but honestly, other than episode 2, every other episode of the prison storyline will be A and above, so A or S. This episode was definitely very, very good. The inclusion of Talia al Ghul was really out of nowhere. I didn't see it coming at all, and it was pretty exciting. I really like that it incorporated that character into this storyline and into this episode. The fight scenes were great. Everything about the prison storyline was definitely very, very, very good. Now, obviously, everything to do with Felicity and all these storylines going on at Star City, not as good, not as gripping, not as interesting at all, but again, the prison storyline easily, without breaking a sweat, carries up this episode and the entirety of the first 7 episodes of this season, making The Demon easy A tier, and definitely higher than episode 4, but I'll rearrange that in just a bit, near the end of at the end of the video. Anyway, then we have episode 12, titled Emerald Archer. This episode is very different from the entirety of Arrow. It definitely takes a different style, which I enjoyed for the most part. I really liked the documentary style they had here. I thought it was a very interesting episode, and this was basically the perfect time in the season to do it, like near the beginning, near the end, to have kind of a filler episode like this one. Definitely was not something I would have enjoyed, but here, episode 12, smack dab in the middle, I think it is, or not really in the middle, episode 11 is, but basically in the middle, I think it is perfect. I really like the entirety of how they handled the documentary on the Emerald Archer. The villain in this episode was surprisingly good and kind of underused, especially his costume, which I think was a good enough costume for a main villain of Arrow. In general, this episode is pretty good. Now, the flash forwards, which I'm pretty sure was only really just one scene, sucked ass, but again, only one scene, so they didn't really affect this episode at all. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. Anyway, I would put Emerald Archer in the A tier, which quite possibly is, actually, I was going to say it's the only episode post the prison storyline that's going to be in A or above, but looking at the rest of the episodes, that might not be true. Anyway, we have episode 19 titled Spartan. This episode I thought was great. I love the storyline with John Diggle and his stepfather, Roy Stewart. I love the reconciliation between the two. I think they did a great job there. And also, obviously, all the John Stewart stuff were just amazing. I loved all of that. It was so exciting in the actual episode. And for the future of this character, it made this character so much better than, maybe not he ever was, but so much better than he was in the last season. Basically, fixing his character entirely. So I definitely think this episode is A tier material, mostly because of the Green Lantern promises we have right now, but also I think in general it's just pretty good. So then we have episode 6 titled Due Process, which which is definitely not the best prison storyline episode, mostly because it doesn't really take place in the prison for the most part, and out of all the episodes, this might have the weakest prison storyline in terms of the episodes. It was mostly about somebody was murdered in the prison and they're trying to figure it out. In the episode, it's not very interesting, but the ending of the episode with it all being revealed to be the Stanley Dover, the character we all thought was incredibly innocent, or Stanley, we didn't even know his last name. Anyway, that was so insane. That was probably the best part of the episode, and the rest of the episode is Felicity and the rest of the team. I say Felicity and the rest of the team because they put her in the forefront. Anyway, the rest of the team now are going up against Ricardo Diaz and the Longbow Hunters, which is pretty good, but also pretty underwhelming. So I would put this episode in the B tier, and I do think episodes 6 and 2 are definitely the weakest of the prison storyline episodes, but that doesn't mean it is not a great storyline, because it is. And honestly, I kind of want to move a bunch of these episodes up to the S tier, but we will see. So moving from the episode that began the Star City Slayer storyline to the one that ended it, episode 13 titled Star City Slayer is not very good. They kind of built up Stanley to be a main villain, although I don't think that would have worked, but more of a recurring villain, maybe a secondary main villain, maybe a villain we see time and time again, maybe even episode in season 8, but this episode threw that out the window, making him a one-off villain. This episode had some pretty intense moments and good acting, but for the most part, it kind of falls flat as it throws the Star City Slayer out the window. A character could have been very interesting. On top of that, the fact that Dinah's throat was slit open, and for one, that didn't kill her, making Curtis he cured everything. He cured paralysis, he cured brain trauma, now he cured a slit throat, so he basically cured death and injury. So that was stupid, and also that led to her losing her powers, which was also pretty stupid. This episode in general was not very good, so I'd put it in the D tier. Then we have episode 22 titled Confessions, which saw the return of Roy Harper, aka Arsenal, way too late into the season. I honestly expected him to return in the first episode, but he didn't until episode 20, mostly because of the flash forwards, which pisses me off. But anyway, the return to Arsenal in this episode is pretty great. We get to see some kicks and flips from the character, and when I say flips, I mean literally. He is pretty cool with all of his flips, and especially near the end of the season. I love his costume so much, so he definitely really brings a lot to this episode, but also this episode kind of has a different feel to it, just like episode 12, which has it's basically a different genre of television. That is a documentary, while the show in general is a action drama. This is not an action drama at all. It's more of a police thriller. It's more of a mystery that they have to solve, a detective mystery, and I kind of like that. I really like what they did here, and in general, I think it was a pretty good episode where they pieced all the storylines together, and it turns out in the end that it's all a twist, that they all lied. Now, I don't love the fact that Roy returned and automatically became a nuisance and a burden for Team Arrow. It felt like he literally just returned to be a burden, and the fact that they said that he died off screen is a little bit too much information for a character, a little bit too much for a character to do off screen, especially a character like Roy Harper. But in general, I really did like this episode, so I would put it in the A tier, which I'm now realizing there's no more room in the A tier. So what I'm going to do here is just put this like here, and I'm going to extend the A tier because I do have maybe one more episode that I think belongs in the A tier. But for now, I'm going to save this episode for last. Let's go over episode 14 titled Brothers and Sisters, which it's not very good. There are a couple pairs of brothers and sisters. There's Oliver and Emiko. Don't really like that. There is the flash forwards with William and Mia. Don't really like that. There's another brother and sister pair I can't really think of at the top of my head. This is definitely not a great episode at all. Don't really have much to add here, so I'd put it in the D tier. So then we have episode 21 titled Living Proof, which had some great moments, like genuinely great moments. The scenes with Tommy, or Colin Donnell as Tommy in this episode, it was so good, mostly because of the music in the background, the same music that played when Tommy died in the season 1 finale. It really hit an emotional chord because they know how much that death in the first season, how emotional that was, especially like how much of a toll it took on Oliver. I think they did a great job with that. There are some pretty good fight scenes, some crazy moments like when Oliver shot Emiko, which I thought was such a great moment because I was so happy that Emiko died because I genuinely hated her at that point. But also then the rest of Team Arrow just died, which honestly I didn't really know that was fake because Diggle was killed, and honestly it was such a great idea to start with Diggle because he was the only character we didn't know was alive in the future. So that was one scene that the flash forwards didn't take away from the tension, which I think they did a great job there. And then they pan from that, revealing the rest of Team Arrow, and then you realize it is fake, which I think they did a great job with that. So I think this episode definitely deserves to be in the A tier, and that's it, just a full A tier. Now you might think that this season has a lot of great episodes. Why is it not considered a great season? That's because looking at these episodes 12, 19, 20, 21, none of these episodes are good because of the season-long storyline. They're all good because of their individual storylines and individual crazy good things they did, which is why this season doesn't really work, because the season-long storyline is pretty bad, and it doesn't really affect any good episodes, and the ones that it is prominently featured in are not very good, just looking at the bottom of this tier list. Anyway, moving on to the last and best of this season, not the last one, the last of this video and the best of the season, episode 7, titled The Slab Side Redemption. This episode is just amazing. The fight scenes, the choreography is quite possibly the best that Arrow has ever had. The one-take fight scenes, I love it so much. This episode, not only do they just have some great fight scenes, they also have a great storyline. They do a great job at making Bronze Tiger a much more interesting character. The rivalry between Oliver and Diaz in this episode is so good. It is incredible. The scene where Diaz goes to the phone booth and talks to Oliver, it's so intense. It's so good, and I think that both of the actors did such a great job at portraying this rivalry, and the fight between them at the end was definitely a very good fight. I don't think it was amazing, I don't think the fight was incredible at the end, but that definitely doesn't take away from the incredible quality of the episode, especially when it comes to the fight scenes. The only problem with the episode is the ending, where Diggle disappears and also Oliver kisses Felicity, but still I think that it definitely is narratively makes so much sense. It didn't ruin Lian Yu, the Felicity kiss, so I'm not going to let it ruin this episode either, which I think is maybe the best, definitely the best episode of the season, and one of the best episodes of the show in general, making it easily deserve to be in the S tier. And I think I'm not going to move anybody around from tier to tier, but I will rearrange the list to make it more accurately represent the actual ranking for this season. So I didn't really rearrange it much, but this is basically my ranking for every episode of Season 7 of Arrow from worst to best. First of all, in the F tier, the worst episode of the season by far is episode 16, titled Star City 2040. In the D tier, we have Star City Slayer, Brothers and Sisters, My Name is Miko Queen, and Unmasked. In the C tier, we have Inheritance and Training Day. In the B tier, we have Lost Canary, The Longbow Hunters, Past Sins, Due Process, and You Have Saved This City. In the A tier, we have Emerald Archer, Confession, Spartan, Living Proof, The Demon, Crossing Lines, Level 2, and Inmate 4587. And then in the S tier, we have Elseworlds Part 2 and The Slab Side Redemption. So that is my tier list for every episode of Arrow Season 7, and obviously the worst being Star City 2040, the best being The Slab Side Redemption. Let me know your comments, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Let me know your list in the comments down below. And if you want me to do this for the Supergirl Season 4 or even Legends of Tomorrow Season 4, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, make sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe, and thanks for watching.